I'm Rochelle Levan, the Landscape Success Program Chair with the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners. Our online program was created by the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in Fort Bend County, along with the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners, to help you create and maintain beautiful home landscapes. All the registrants in our class today will receive a follow-up email with a recording of this class, as well as any links to websites or resources that our presenter may refer to. You'll also see a QR code that will be included in the presentation at the very end. We will ask you to please be sure to fill out that survey so we can use the feedback as we prepare and improve future classes. If you have any questions during the class, you can enter them in the chat. The questions will be answered at the end of our presentation. If we have any disruptions in the group chat, we'll remove that person and proceed to delete any inappropriate comments. So please bear with us if that does occur. You will see that the chat will be disabled if anything like that happens. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Peggy DeHemicourt. Peggy joined the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners in 2003. She was advanced trained in earth-kind landscaping in 2015 and enjoys sharing her knowledge with others. She served as president of the Fort Bend County Master Gardeners in 2016 and 2017 and has held various other Fort Bend Master Gardener board positions over the years. She and her husband live in the Richmond area where they employ many earth-kind landscaping practices and landscape with native and well-adapted plants to attract birds and pollinators. So thank you for being with us today, Peggy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rochelle. And welcome, everybody. Nice to be with you today. This is what I have planned for us over the next 90 minutes. We're going to have an introduction to earth-kind landscaping. We'll talk some about landscape planning, planting bed preparation, plant selection and placement, and landscape design elements. That is a lot to cover in 90 minutes. I'm not going to take deep dives into each topic, but we'll kind of cover it generically, and I'll provide you resource links where you can learn more about things on your own time. So let's start with the fundamental. What's your landscape? What do we mean by landscape? Well, it's what you and others see around your house and other buildings. It's not just about flowering plants. It includes your lawn, your trees, your planting beds, and your hardscapes like patios. It's truly about the entirety of your space, and just like a home, you can think of it as having ceilings of trees and arbors, walls of shrubs and vines, and floors of lawns, ground covers, and hardscapes. And if your landscape is well designed, it will have value. It'll enhance the beauty and the value of your home. It gives you a nice place to relax and enjoy the outdoors. And if you do it well, it should be low maintenance and sustainable. Let's focus on that word sustainable for a minute. Sustainable landscapes work with nature. They're both attractive and they're in balance with the local climate and the soil. And they reduce the need for irrigation, at least not as for a lot of irrigation, and reduces the need for man-made inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. If your landscape's sustainable, it's healthy for the environment. And in the process, you're probably promoting biodiversity, helping wildlife like pollinators and birds. So low maintenance and sustainability can be achieved by adopting Earthkind landscaping principles. Earthkind is a landscape management system. It was created by horticultural specialists and agents and volunteers of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, along with industry representatives. And as you can see from the name, it is a federally registered trademark of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and that has been done to protect its educational focus, its use, and its integrity. So what is earth-kind landscaping? Well, it's a set of landscaping principles that is based on research, and it helps us create a horticultural system based on real-world effectiveness and environmental responsibilities. Now, I've italicized those words, real-world effectiveness and environmental responsibility, to add emphasis. When I talk about real-world effectiveness, in this context, we're talking about the processes that occur in nature without human interaction. You know that in nature, plants grow where they're well adapted. They take their nourishment from the soil, and that soil is continually replenished by the decomposition of fallen leaves and other organic matter. And that decomposition process returns nutrients to the soil, maintaining its fertility. So in nature, plants perform without people, and they coexist with other living organisms in mutually beneficial relationships. But I think that probably we would agree that most of our homes don't exist in the real world, as I'm talking about that here. We probably have houses that exist in areas that were disturbed by development when they were built. And so earth-kind landscaping teaches us how to imitate the real-world processes in our home landscapes, and in turn, that benefits the environment. I want to point your attention to the website on this slide, aggiehorticulture.tamu.edu/earthkind. That is a treasure trove of practical advice for home gardeners. Everything I'm talking about today and more is explained there in easy to understand language that everybody can benefit from. So let's look one more slide and a little bit more about the real world as I'm using it here. These are what I think are the lessons from the real world. A plant's going to reach its potential if it's in the right place. And what that means is it has the right light, the right soil, gets the rainfall it needs or other irrigation, and the space it needs. The real world can teach us that organically enriched soils sustain that plant life and that balanced ecosystems are healthy. Now look at that picture. I mean, that's one I took when I was vacationing in the Pacific Northwest. I was in this beautiful park, and nobody created that. Nature created that. And you can't see a bit of bare ground in that place and mature trees, and it all happens because of natural processes. That's what earth-kind landscaping is trying to help us to imitate in our more manicured suburban landscapes. So when I say that balanced ecosystems are healthy, what do I mean by an ecosystem? Well, it's really all the living things in an area and the environment in which they live, even our yards. As gardeners, our challenge is to take these real-world lessons to heart and work with nature in our landscapes. And gardening based on earth-kind principles can help us accomplish that. So here's the overview of earth-kind landscaping. It encourages water conservation and quality, landscaping for energy conservation, reduction of fertilizer and pesticide use, and reduction of yard wastes entering landfills. I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining to you why these goals are important. Let's start with water. I'd say that most of us take it for granted. We turn on the tap and we expect it to be there. But when we think about it, we know that people are working hard behind the scenes to manage our reservoirs and our rivers, to make sure that all the competing interests are met, that there's enough water for farming, for industry, for recreation, and for municipal water districts to purify so that it can reach our homes and be usable. This graph that you see is one published by the Texas Water Development Board. And the blue line at the top is the predicted water demand in the state of Texas between 2020 and 2070. The red hashed line on the bottom is the predicted existing supplies during those periods of time. And notice how that gap is widening. We're hearing a lot about this issue in the news. We're hearing about, we know that lots of Texas is in a drought right now, and a lot of areas are experiencing water shortages. People are starting to be concerned about the data centers that are being planned for parts of Texas because they need a lot of water. And during the same, 50 years, Texas population is expected to keep growing. So it's a real issue, and I encourage you to keep an eye on it in the news. So why does that matter to us as homeowners and gardeners? Well, let's think about what role our landscaping habits play in water consumption. Extension has told us that about 25% of the water supply in urban areas of Texas is used for landscape and garden watering. And the Environmental Protection Agency says that across the United States, that amounts to 9 billion gallons per day of water that's used for landscaping. And they estimate that as much as half of that might be being wasted. Well, what does that mean? Well, wasted means if it's sprayed into the air, like this picture seems to be showing us, lots of it can be lost due to evaporation. Wind might take the water away from where you're intending it to be, where it might even run off your property. Or we're just using inefficient irrigation methods and systems, or frankly, we're watering too much. So think about runoff and how that affects water quality. When irrigation water runs off of our landscapes, it leaves like storm water. It ends up in the storm drain. And if there are pollutants on our property, it's taking those pollutants with it. Well, what are pollutants from a gardening perspective? Well, it's things like nitrates and phosphates. Those are components of fertilizers. And when we put fertilizer down on our lawn or in our gardens, it doesn't get consumed right away. It will lay there and it can be washed away, which can cause problems. And same is true for insecticides and herbicides. And you see this picture on this slide. I mean, that's not thirsty concrete. That's just poor watering practices. So that's the kind of thing we want to try to avoid when we irrigate our lawns and our gardens. So we want to reduce runoff. You recall that I said that EarthKind encourages us to reduce our fertilizer and pesticide use. Well, there are a lot of reasons we could want to do that. It costs us money, for one thing. We often don't know what we need or how much of it we need. And so if we put it down too often, we're maybe causing damage. If we put it down at the wrong time of year, it's being wasted. As I've mentioned, when the fertilizer leaves our property, it might impact aquatic life in rivers and streams and bays and lakes. And it can even impact our plants' health. When things like phosphorus build up in the soil, they can affect a plant's ability to take up nutrients, which means you've got an unhappy plant. And where pesticides are concerned, if we're using broad spectrum pesticides, we may be killing beneficial insects that are good for the environment as we're trying to control garden pests. Excuse me for a second. So those are reasons why we should think about our use of fertilizers and pesticides. The next thing EarthKind encourages us is to reduce the amount of yard waste that we're sending to landfills. And I think this might be improving a little bit. I don't see big bags of grass after the lawn is mowed. I'm not seeing in neighborhoods lots of bags of grass at the curb to be picked up. And I think that's being helped to some degree, a large degree perhaps, by the prevalence of mulching mowers, where the blades of the mower are mulching the grass so finely that it can be left on the lawn. But the reason we should try to reduce the amount of yard waste going to landfills is that it takes up a lot of space and it costs the state money. That means it costs us money. And remember the real world, the natural world we talked about in the beginning? Well, that soil in those forests is being replenished by fallen leaves and twigs that are left to decompose on the forest floor. Well, we can kind of replicate in that in our gardens, for example, if we want to rake our leaves and shred them and use them as mulch. So that's a way to sort of recycle our yard waste to help us build good soil. And you can compost too. A lot of people do backyard composting and then add that compost to their garden beds. So this is how nature recycles organic waste, and that results in soil fertility and plant health. So that's the rationale behind the development of something called earth-kind landscaping. Here's how the advice is organized. If you go to Aggie Horticulture's website later, you're going to find that earth-kind landscaping is organized around these 7 earth-kind principles. I'm going to be touching on most of these today, but we don't have a lot of time in today's class to cover everything in great detail. But I'm telling you where to go find more information, and I hope that you do. So I'm going to start the conversation with planning and design, and I'm going to get that conversation started to share with you one of my big landscape planning and design mistakes. I'm hopeful that you'll learn from my mistake. So I take you back to the year 1992. My husband and I bought 2 bare acres in a subdivision in Richmond along FM 359. We built a house. We were so excited. We were moving out of Pecan Grove Plantation and we were going to the country just a few miles down the road. So here we have a house on 2 bare acres. The established homes in the neighborhood had trees. There were some old growth trees, lots of pecan trees towards the back of the neighborhood. But we were on a bare piece of property, and I'm a gardener, and that wouldn't do. I had to get started doing something. I didn't have a landscape plan at the time. We were both working full time. Weekends were jam-packed with chores, as you can appreciate. The easiest thing we could do to get started with our landscape was to go out on a Saturday to a nearby nursery and buy a tree in a small pot, one small enough that we could plant ourselves. And hey, what did we choose? Well, we chose a live oak. Don't ask me why. I thought that was a smart thing to do. And we planted it 60 feet from the back of the house. Sounds like a long distance, don't you think? So here we had built a house using a set of plans, but we were starting to make planting decisions in the yard without planning first. So that's 1992. 6 years later, I hired a landscaper to help me put together a landscape plan. And what was decided was, you can see this is the patio in the back of the house. So this is looking out at that backyard. And the recommendation that we came up with was that we were going to create kind of a more intimate space off the patio by creating an outdoor room. And we were going to do that with these 3 island beds right off the patio. And the landscaper said, Peggy, what do you want? What kind of gardening do you want to do? So guess what? I wanted everything. I wanted to grow herbs and vegetables. I wanted to plant native plants for birds and butterflies. I wanted to have a rose garden. And I wanted it to have a focal point in it, some place to make it. I wanted it to look like a designed landscape. And so here you have it. Here were my edible things. Here were my birdie things and native plants. Here's the bird houses that were going to go in there. The roses and things were going to be back here. And here was a pergola with a swing underneath it and some flagstone. And I was so excited. I said, yeah, this is perfect. And I hired her to install these beds and get this going for me while I was at work. But look what's there. There's that little live oak. Now, this is 6 years after we planted it, and it wasn't so little anymore, but it wasn't so big either. And the things that I wanted to do in these beds, well, they require full sun. And I had it at that time. Uh, and I didn't recall us talking about this live oak, whether it should be in this plan or not, but it stayed in the plan and in the yard. I wasn't resourceful enough at the time, or maybe I was too busy. But if I were considering adding a tree to my landscape today, I would be doing some research. Excuse me. Let me go back. I'd be doing some research. This is a great website, texastreeplanting.tamu.edu. And what do we know about live oaks? Well, they're not too tall, but they're really, really wide, and their branches grow low. Sometimes you can't even walk under them. And so 33 years later, last year, here's my live oak in my intimate space in the backyard. And I measured the distance between the trunk and this furthest branch, and it was 35 feet. And that's only half the oak. And I no longer had full sun. Um, I was having to, over the years, I've had to change my planting to be shade adaptable plants. I had to move the edible garden to a sunny spot. But the good news is we've still got a lot of native things going on out there, and the birds are coming into the yard, and we love that. So all is not lost. But if I could do it all over again, I would have taken out the oak. You may be able to tell that I did plant some large shade trees on the outside of this intimate garden room, and I wish I only had that and I didn't have this oak. But I have too much invested in this live oak, and I just can't bear to take it out. We did prune this tree this last winter, so this branch is gone, and some of these branches over here are gone. So the canopy's raised a little bit, not too much, but a little. And so I'm hoping more sunlight will reach my plants this year. But the point is, landscaping can get complicated, right? If you don't have a plan. The idea under Earthkind landscaping is to design for longevity and efficient management. Design with the long term in mind. I didn't do that by leaving that live oak there, but you should as you think about what you want to do to your landscape. Hopefully what you're doing, whether you're starting from scratch in a new house or whether you want to just remodel your yard like people remodel a bathroom or a kitchen, the effort that you undertake is going to last for years to come, and you want it to be easily manageable. Every site is unique. Landscape design has no fixed rules, and good designs incorporate several principles. Now, when you think of landscape design, you might think of color and texture and, the beautiful visual things that landscape design usually conjures up. And I'm going to cover that towards the end of my talk today. Earthkind landscaping has sort of different design objectives, and they are listed here. You want to have a beautiful landscape that's low maintenance, conserves resources, and fits your lifestyle. These are the physical and environmental elements of design when you're thinking Earthkind. Sunlight and shade. That's a deciding factor in your plant selection. You have to know your property, where the sun shines in different seasons, what's casting shadows like your fences, your house, existing trees. Then you have to think about your soil conditions. I'm going to talk more about soil in a few minutes, but soil, the chemical and the physical properties of soil greatly affect plant performance. Then you've got to think about structures, both overhead and underground. Overhead structures like power lines, or underground structures like buried utility lines and irrigation pipes before you start planting trees, for example, whose canopies may later interfere with overhead structures or whose roots might interfere with buried structures. And of course, you've got to consider the mature height and width of plants when you select them. And remember that a tree's root system will extend to and beyond the breadth of its canopy. When you're designing earth-kind wise, you might want to consider wind and windbreaks. Windbreaks, like could be plants, they could be fences or buildings. They provide protection from the cold and can reduce water loss in your plants. And if you should take advantage, I should say, of slope and drainage on your property. The idea here is to, when it rains, try to keep as much of that water on your property where it can soak into the soil in your landscape and be used by your trees and plants, rather than having it make a beeline for the driveway and go down the storm sewer where it's not put to use for you on your landscape. So Earthkind focuses on these physical and environmental elements of design. So achieving an Earthkind landscape involves creating a plan. You want to plan for complete development, allow time and space for future changes. You don't have to get it done all at once, but just make sure that work that you do is part of a grand plan. It's okay to take your time. Um, and these are the considerations that you're going to take into account. We'll talk more about those in just a second. So these are the factors that influence landscape design. Starting with your budget. That's everything. It might include things like excavating, getting building permits, hiring subcontractors, removing and disposing of surface materials. You might be trucking in soil and soil amendments. You might be buying and installing hardscape. What's that mean? Like patio pavers and stuff. Of course, you're going to be buying plants and maybe sod for the lawn, and you might even be building a structure like a pergola, something like that. So, make sure you've got the money to achieve what you're planning. Another factor that influences your design would be your neighborhood sights and sounds. Maybe you want to do something to reduce noise or block undesirable views from your windows or your patios. Site characteristics is kind of, in a typical suburban backyard, this might come into play too much. But if you had a piece of property, you could have some pretty cool natural resources on your site, like a pond or a stream or some mature trees or some rock outcroppings. You'd want to examine that and preserve what you can, not so much in a typical suburban neighborhood, uh, but maybe if you have acreage, that could come into play. One site characteristic in a suburban neighborhood that we can take into account is controlling water drainage, and I'll be talking about that shortly. And then the last point here is climate. What do we mean by climate? Well, it's how cold does it get? How hot does it get? How much sunlight do you have? Which way does the wind blow? And how much rain do we get? And if you look at this landscape, this drawing, I should say, it's trying to illustrate these things. The house faces east and west. You consider where the sun rises in the summer and the winter. You know how the sun is different in the different seasons. You've got a western exposure on back. You've got north here and maybe winter winds, maybe a wind barrier could be useful. These are the kinds of design considerations that you're encouraged to take into account. And of course, you can find more about this at Aggie Horticulture. So once you start taking these factors in consideration, then you clarify your design intentions. What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Do you want more privacy? Or maybe you want to open up views. Maybe you have a good view to some open space in your back outside your yard and you want to see it. Maybe you want to create a children's play area or a work or service area. Maybe you want to do more outdoor entertaining. and you want to focus maybe on areas that are visible to the public, curb appeal. So once you think about those things, then you think about what kinds of gardens you want. Remember my example, I wanted everything. Maybe you do too. It's kind of helpful if you can narrow those down to some things that are high priorities for you. But gardens can be formal or they can be informal. Uh, Maybe you want to have edible gardens. Maybe you want a wildscape for native plants, for butterflies and birds. Maybe you want a water garden. What you do in your front yard might be different from what you do in your backyard. In the front yard, you might have to pay more attention to the HOA requirements and, curb appeal. But in the backyard, you might be able to be more artistically creative with your landscaping. So here's a diagram that sort of illustrates what I've just talked about. So here's the front of the house, and they want an attractive entrance and maybe some semi-privacy. And out here, they want an outdoor living area with barbecue and cooking and socializing. And they maybe want a children's play area on this part of the yard. And maybe leave this area open for recreation, maybe a swimming pool in the future, and use this side of the lawn for things like a potting area and garden storage and maybe a vegetable garden. And that's maybe where you hide the trash cans. You get the picture. But you're figuring out how you want to use your space. And then the recommendation is put it on paper. I showed you the landscape plan that I had years ago. Well, make a sketch of your property to scale that includes all these things you see here on the slide. And I'll show you an example of that next. And here's a house. And we've identified the water line coming into the house and the gas line, the electric line, the sewer line. We've got an existing tree back here. We've got a glass sliding door. The neighbor's house is 10 feet away. There's a window here that's large, 6 by 4, but it's 4 feet off the ground. So there's going to be space underneath that window for some appropriate landscaping if we want to use it. And there's another window here that's 3 feet off the ground. So when you've identified those things that you have to avoid, you can change your drawing to your final plot plan with just those unmovable things sketched to be mindful of where they are so that you don't disturb them. And here's the existing tree. And then you can use tracing paper laid over your final plot plan and start to make changes. You can add and remove things. You can create new planting beds. Make sure you have enough turf grass to satisfy your needs. You can add your structures, and in the process, consider ways to make your landscape more earth kind. Time for me to take a drink of water. So that's a really fast run through on how to get something from your head in terms of your landscape to paper that you can plan to. Now, once you get it planned, you've got to install it. And installing your landscape plan requires these steps, at least. You're going to build your planting beds based on your plan, and that's probably going to involve, if you're expanding them anyway, you may be removing some of your existing turf grass. I'm going to tell you about how you're going to improve the soil. Then you're going to select plants and think about their proper placement in mind. And if you want an irrigation system, this would be the time to install it. And then at the end, you'll be mulching things. So I'm going to move from here to the soil improvement topic. I love this. I love this quote. It came from the Texas Master Gardener Handbook, and it's so true, isn't it? Without fertile soil, plants can't reach their potential, and the life that depends on plants would really be in trouble if we didn't have them. Think about everything we eat as human beings, from our salads to our steaks. It either involves eating plants or plants were involved to raise the cattle that produce the steak. So, and it doesn't happen without soil. It's just the place where all the magic happens. And it needs your attention if you want to improve your landscape. These are the essential functions of soil. When we look at a plant in our yard, we don't see what we can't see, obviously. We're looking at everything above ground. The plant's foliage, its flowers, its form and structure. That's what we care about visually. But the really important stuff is happening below ground level. The soil is anchoring those plants in place. Think about the huge trees that can withstand winds blowing because they have anchors of roots to hold them in place. The soil is not, it's loose. It should be loose to some degree so that it retains water and nutrients and it has air spaces in it. And it's those air spaces that make the channels that a healthy root system can grow through to expand. You know, the part of the plant that we see is only as good as the quality of the root system that's below ground. And the fun part for me, the magic part for me, is that soil is the environment where microorganisms live. The microorganisms that interact with those plant roots and that enable the transfer of nutrients and water, not so much water, but enable the transfer of nutrients from the soil through the roots into the plant. I love talking about this. So, our soil should be full of life. There are microorganisms that we cannot see with the naked eye, things like bacteria and fungi and yeast and nematodes and algae. And then there are macroorganisms, the things you see when you're on your knees tending to your landscape, maybe weeding a flower bed or planting something new. You're finding the earthworms or the pill bugs and the snails and the slugs, etc. Those micro and macro organisms are performing an important function. They are consuming organic matter. They're eating and eating and eating organic matter until it's decomposed to a degree that it cannot be decomposed anymore. And that's when we call what's left humus. And it's that humus, the final product of decomposition, that releases nutrients slowly to our plants and allows our plants to develop more expansive root systems and an improved soil structure. This next factoid blows me away. The Natural Resources Conservation Service of the United States Department of Agriculture says that there are more soil microbes in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on Earth. I think that's really cool. But what this comes back around to is that natural world example that we talked about in the first place, the forest floor. How do those beautiful redwood forests, not florists, forests survive? Those redwood trees in California, they don't get to what they are with human intervention. It's nature making that happen. And things like microbes and organic matter in the soil is what's doing it. So as gardeners, our job is to have soil improvement be an objective in our landscapes. And what that means is we got to make our soil more favorable for the plants to grow. And probably we have some, maybe all of these problems to overcome in our yards. Uh, Compaction, poor drainage, low fertility, excess nutrients, I'll talk about that, and thin topsoil. You know, I mentioned early on that we don't live in the natural world, do we? This picture to me says it all. When new developments are built, the landscape is cleared. It's no other word for it. Heavy equipment is, clearing off all the vegetation, compacting the soil, maybe even removing, the good topsoil that was there. And then the developer comes along and builds the roads and builds the houses, which involves more heavy equipment compacting the soil. And then when the developer is finished, he might put down a few inches of topsoil and grade your yard and put in your grass and maybe a few shrubs, and the work is done. Well, one of the Texas A&M AgriLife specialists who teaches soils tells us, master gardeners, that it's estimated that new build homes in Texas might only have about 2 inches of soil suitable to accept a plant's root zone. So we have to make it our job to improve the soil, and a plant's root zone could use 6 inches of soil suitable for roots. Now, the good news is we can help, and the longer you're in a place and gardening, the healthier and healthier your soil should become. So, older neighborhoods probably have much better soil for growing things than new neighborhoods do. So, that takes me to planting bed construction. You've got your plan, you know what you're going to do. So, now you have to build some flower beds, as we call them. Well, the recommended advice is to build a raised bed. Now, how do you do that? Well, you want to raise the elevation of your planting bed above the native soil grade, where your grass is growing. You can do that by adding topsoil. Maybe you have existing soil that was excavated from another part of your property when you were doing your renovations that you can put there. Or else you go buy commercially available landscape soil and you bring it in. Um, so the idea is your bed is going to kind of be crowned in the center and it's going to have gently sloping sides. But before you get to that point, after you've added your soil, you're going to incorporate 3 inches of fully finished compost. That's the starting point of the organic matter that your plants are going to need. And then when you finish, you're going to add a 3-inch layer of organic mulch, like native hardwood mulch, for example. So, what's that look like? Well, I was on vacation last year, and this is in British Columbia, and here's a flower bed. Now, granted, this is over the top, in my opinion. Professionally managed, I'm sure. It's in a very public place, and it probably looks beautiful 24/7, 52 weeks out of the year. But notice it doesn't have a border. It looks to me like it's crowned in the center and it's got sloping sides and the whole thing is planted. Well, that's one way to build a raised bed. But here's a picture in my backyard taken a couple of weeks ago. Not because it's beautiful, but here's a bed off the back patio. This is typically what most of us end up doing. We use an edging to edge it, and we go through the process I just described. And so I'm maybe, I don't know, 6 inches above grade down here. And of course, it's winter time, and my winter damaged plants need to be cut back, and nothing's beautiful or growing right now. But this is more typical of what a homeowner might be creating. But you could do something like this, obviously, if you wanted to. It could be as high as 12 inches in the center, or it could be as high as, I don't know, 5, 6 inches in the center. The idea is you're helping create an environment for those roots. And I failed to mention this, but when you've built your bed and you're adding that soil to make your raised bed, you want to take a shovel and work your soil additions in a little bit to the native soil that's underneath so that you don't have an existing layer on top of an added layer. You want to stir it up a little bit, so to speak, so that the two layers are uh, combined somewhat. Hope that makes sense. So let me tell you now why we want to incorporate the 3 inches of compost. These are the functions of compost. It's the magic. It releases nutrients into the soil that your plants need. Most of us in Fort Bend County are on clay soils, which are not awful, but they can be improved by adding compost. That helps them drain a little bit better. If you happen to be on sandy soil, you know that when you water, water goes right through sandy soils. Your roots hardly have time to take advantage of it. But you can increase water retention in sandy soils, but with the addition of compost. And of course, you're adding diversity of soil microbe populations and helping them grow. And by adding the compost, you're enabling the plants to expand the root system. So much is going on underground that we can't see. So the saying goes, if we feed the microbes some compost, the microbes will feed our plants. Now, when you finish building your raised beds and you've maybe put in some plants or you're about to put in some plants, you may be thinking, oh, I wonder if I should add a bag of fertilizer. Well, the advice I have for you today is before you do that, have your soil tested. Learn what nutrients you need to apply before you go buy a bag of something that's got stuff in it that you don't need, because remember the runoff problems and the issues that that can cause. It's going to save you time and money, and it's going to be good for the environment. Now, this may sound complicated to you, but I grabbed this off of Facebook a couple of days ago. It couldn't be easier. Um, all it takes is a clean bucket, a trowel or a shovel. Let's say this is your raised bed garden. You go around and you take a shovel full of, soil. You go down 6 inches if you can. Put each scoop in the bucket, mix it up, pull out anything like rocks or chunks of mulch or something like that. Try to make it good soil. You fill out a form, easy to fill out. You can get it off the soil testing website. I'm going to back up and show you that again. You can either put it in this little bag that you can get from the extension office, or you can use a Ziploc bag, which I have done, and you mail it in with about $12, give or take. And in about 10 days' time, you have instructions as to what to put in your bed. Now I'm gonna back up 1 second. Here's the soil testing.tamu.edu. That's where you go to find the form, the instructions, and all that good stuff. So, excuse me, let's think about a plant and what it needs to survive. So, a plant gets carbon and oxygen from the air, it gets hydrogen and oxygen from water, and then the rest of its nutrients come from soil. And the primary nutrients it needs are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the primary nutrients every plant needs are carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, come from air and water, and then nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium can be found in fertile soil. So the question is, how fertile is your soil? When you send the soil test in, you get back a result that looks something like this. It will tell you, it will show, here's your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. And see this line right here? That's called the critical level. It's telling me that the soil sample that this person sent in has enough potassium in it. It's above the critical level. It has enough phosphorus in it. In fact, the phosphorus is high. It hardly has enough nitrogen in it at all. So all this person needs for this garden is to add nitrogen, and the test result comes back with this recommendation. It tells you how much to apply based on what you've told them you're growing when you sent in your sample. So it's easy and it's earth kind because it helps us buy the right bag of fertilizer when we get to the store and not over apply nutrients that potentially will run off or build up in the soil and cause problems with plant health. Okay, now, um, so if you get your soil tested, if you need to add fertilizer, you can add it. And I mentioned that you're going to top your beds with an organic mulch like native bark mulch. It's typically used for flower bed plantings, but you can use pine needles if you've got the right, if you like the aesthetic, and they can be used, and other things like that. You can shred your leaves that fall from trees and use them as mulch. I do that. Uh, why mulch? Well, it keeps your soil moist. You're going to lose less water to evaporation. That means you have to water less. That means you're conserving water. It's good for the world. It helps to moderate soil temperatures. The soil underneath mulch can be about 30 degrees cooler than soil under bare soil. Cooler soil, generally speaking, is better for plant root growth and development. When you have a good layer of mulch, you're going to have fewer weeds. It's going to help prevent weed germination. If you have a gully washer of a rainstorm, all your good garden soil is less prone to be eroded because that soil, excuse me, the mulch is going to protect it from erosion. And guess what? Your mulch is organic. So over time, it's too is going to decompose. And it's like composting in place. And eventually it will decompose and be worked on by those microbes. And it will long term improve your soil structure, becoming a continuous slow release nutrient supply. And lastly, it can help prevent foliar disease on your plants. If you're growing a plant on bare soil and rain splashes on the soil, if there are plant diseases in the soil, it could splash up to a leaf on your plant and transfer that disease to your plant and cause problems. So mulch is more than just an aesthetic thing. It's like the real world solution to a lot of problems. It's what's happening on the forest floor, only we have to make it happen in our landscapes, right? Okay, so you've got your bed built, maybe fertilized if your soil test said you needed it, you've got it mulched, now you're ready to put your plants in. So, plant spacing is important. You got to think ahead, not like me with my oak tree. You've got to space those plants with future growth in mind. Every plant you buy either has a tag that gives you this information or you can find the information online. You want to know how big they're going to be when they're mature because you may be buying them in a 4-inch pot and they look really, really tiny. You might be tempted to put a lot of them close together, but you don't want to do that. You want to estimate where they're going to be when they're mature so that there's very little space between them or that they're barely touching on their outermost leaves. Um, if you overcrowd things, um, bad things can happen. The lower limbs and the leaves might die off, and the plants might tend to be leggier, meaning they're reaching for sunlight, not looking so good. Um, Things like roses and certain other shrub species might be prone to fungal diseases like black spot. And that's more likely to occur when they're in overcrowded conditions because air movement is hindered and the leaves stay too wet too long. And then insects can be a problem because you're giving the insects a shelter. I mean, if everything's real crowded up, it's, insect condo. They're sheltered from wind, rain, and natural enemies. So you could find that you have more insect problems. So when you're planting your plants for the first time in your newly created bed, be patient, think about the future, and don't try to create what I've called an instant landscape. Now, there are some other considerations for plant placement. There's a term called microclimate. Our homes have different conditions depending on what side of the house we're talking about. Some parts of our homes outside might be cooler, hotter, more humid, shadier, sunnier. more exposed or protected from wind. That all those conditions can affect a spot's suitability for different types of plants. So these differing environmental conditions within a landscape are called microclimates. And a good design is going to take advantage and use plants where they're most suited. So as you see here on the north side, you're more likely going to use plants that want shade or tolerate less heat. On the east side, plants that want part shade. They like that morning sun, but boy, they want a reprieve from the hot afternoon sun. On the west and southwest side, that's where you want your heat-loving, drought-tolerant plants because it's going to get that hot, drying west sun in the summertime. And then on the south side, that would be a good place to plant your tropical or subtropical or tender plants, things like hibiscus, tropical hibiscus, or maybe citrus. Because you can see in this diagram, in the wintertime, the sun is more in the southern part of the sky. And so the south side of your house, that microclimate, if the winter sun is beating on your brick, that heat, it radiates back out into the flower bed that might be nearby. And when we have a night where there's a frost or a light freeze, those plants might get a little protection from that radiant heat that's coming out of your house on that south side of the house. No guarantee that you won't lose them in a hard freeze or have to protect them. But think about the microclimates around your house when you're thinking about what plants to use where. And then think about diversity. If you plant only one or two types of plants, it might be kind of boring and they could be vulnerable. A deadly disease could take out an entire bed. If pests or diseases move in, they tend to move freely in larger plantings of a single species. But if you plant with diversity, they may be less vulnerable to attack by plant pests or diseases. And it's a good way to reduce our use of pesticides, which we might reach for if we had pests or diseases, right? But you have to be careful. You want it to look attractive, and too many types of plants can look messy and a little bit chaotic. And of course, it all depends on what you like, what you're trying to achieve. Now, moving on to water conservation, and we're still talking about plants, um, but if you can also think about grouping plants according to their water needs, because that gives you zones for irrigation purposes. Um, you can apply the right amount of water for the plant material that you have in the ground and not overdo it or underdo it. And here's how they're defined. Something called the regular watering zone. That's the greatest water needs. Plants in the regular watering zone need, I'd say, an inch of water weekly, either from rainfall or supplemental irrigation. That would be your lawn, tender annuals and perennials, and a fruit or a vegetable garden. Then there's the natural rainfall zone, the opposite end of the spectrum. Doesn't need any supplemental irrigation at all unless we get in a prolonged drought. That's where you'd put your native and your other drought tolerant plants. So you'd be saving water by not irrigating them. And then other things fall in what you might think of as the occasional watering zone, like once or twice a month if we don't have enough rainfall. And that would be things like ornamental grasses and most herbaceous perennials. Um, a herbaceous perennial is it's a perennial, meaning it's going to live a couple of years or more. But its top, its growth is going to die back to the ground in the winter, but it's going to come back from the roots. That's what we mean by herbaceous perennial. And then you want to include, if you're going to have an irrigation system, consider using drip irrigation. It conserves water. It's at least 90% efficient in delivering water to your landscape compared to traditional spray or sprinkler irrigation, which is often only 50 to 70% efficient. Drip irrigation applies water slowly where it's needed. It's needed in the root zone. It's not needed to be sprayed on the leaves or into the air. So this is a good way to irrigate if you're creating new planting beds. Also, considering landscape design for water conservation, think about how turf grass is being used. If you notice in the picture on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, I call this, what we have in a typical neighborhood. The turf grass is filler. It's like wall-to-wall carpet. Wherever we don't have concrete sidewalks or patios, we have grass. And it's really not a very attractive design feature. Sometimes it can be hard to irrigate in some of those crazy corners. But look how appealing that left-hand side picture is. The lawn is more of a design element. It's part of the overall design. There's not as much lawn. There are some nice big planting beds on the outside. And you have irrigation and mowing efficiency because of those nice, easily curved lines. It is said, folks, that turf grass is the largest irrigated crop in the country and tends to be the heaviest user of irrigation water in our landscapes. And a lot of our lawns receive too much water because we really haven't figured out how much they need sometimes, and that can even cause disease problems. So thinking about your lawn as a design element, if you're designing around your backyard, think about it's called the landscape rule of thumb. Equal parts turf grass, planting beds with native and well-adapted plants, and hardscapes. Those would be your decks, your patios, and your walkways. Okay. Still talking about water conservation, you might find you have an opportunity to have a rain garden. I mentioned earlier how wonderful it would be if you could keep the water that comes off your roof during a rain on your property instead of it going to the curb and into the storm sewer. You'd be putting it to work on your landscape, and you'd be helping with pollution problems. So how do you do that? Well, there's something called a rain garden. This is a rain garden. If you have the right slope, you could create something like this, not far from a downspout, between the downspout and the curb. Either you have a natural depression or you create a slight depression where water will naturally be captured, and then you plant plants in it that tolerate alternating wet and dry conditions. That's what a rain garden is. Nobody would know that's a rain garden. It just looks like a big flower bed, but you're keeping precious water on your landscape, letting it percolate back into the ground and keeping it out of the storm sewer. And if you want to know more about rain gardens, visit this website, watersmart.tamu.edu. And then landscaping for energy conservation, that's a lot about trees. If you properly place trees, you can shade your house in the summer, which can reduce temperatures in the home by as much as 8 to 10 degrees. And you can help warm your house in the winter. If you're using deciduous trees who drop their leaves in the wintertime, then the sunlight can penetrate the canopy and hit your roof, helping to keep it warm in the winter. So how you use trees can change the microclimate around your home. There's advice here on texastreeplanting.tamu.edu. It's called the Texas Tree Planting Guide. I encourage you to look at that if you're considering adding a tree to your landscape. Don't make the mistake I did. And then if trees are not an option for you, but you want to do something for energy conservation, you could consider these options. Vines growing on a trellis and espaliers, that's what this is, an espalier, can shade windows and walls. And then vines on landscape arbors or overhead structures can provide shade for living areas. All right, so now we're going to move on to plant selection and visual impact. That we're in the home stretch, guys. So Earthkind Landscaping recommends that when we choose plants, we use some combination of native and well-adapted plants because they require fewer inputs. What's an input? Water, fertilizer. And they typically don't need pesticides as often or ever because they're more tolerant of pests and our native soil conditions. So here are two great examples. You've got the beautiful crepe myrtle at the top, and you've got the native Yaupon holly with those beautiful red berries at the bottom. Once we get native and well-adapted plants and shrubs and trees established, they require little or no supplemental water in our area because we get, as a rule, average annual precipitation of at least 30 inches. In a good year, we're up in the 40s. So they're self-sustainable, if we get the right amount of rainfall. Of course, the trick with rainfall is it doesn't always happen evenly throughout the year. So I don't mean to make it sound too simple. But I want to explore this native versus well-adapted terminology a little bit with you and then show you some plants that I use. So what's a native plant? Well, it evolved in a native range climate, and it will thrive on native range soils. On the other hand, adapted plants were introduced to our landscapes through the horticulture industry. They usually originate from areas of the world with similar soil types, climates, and hardiness zones to ours. Now, the line between native and adapted can get a little bit fuzzy, especially when a plant native to parts of Texas are used in another part of Texas when they're not native. We sometimes casually refer to plants as a Texas native. Well, let's explore Texas for a little bit. Because of its size and geographic location, Texas is unique among states. Texas covers over 266,000 square miles. It's second only to Alaska in land area, and a great deal of variation in climate and landscapes, the factors that influence habitat diversity. Texas is at a crossroads where eastern habitats meet western ones, and southern subtropical habitats meet northern temperate ones. The average annual rainfall can range from as little as 10 inches in El Paso to up to 56 inches in the swamps of East Texas. So a plant that's native to one ecoregion in Texas may not be a great choice for other parts of Texas. So when you think native and you hear Texas native, you need to think about where that nativeness applies. Now, here we are, we're in this ecoregion. It's the Gulf prairies and marshes. It runs the coast. It extends all the way from Brownsville up here to the east side of Houston or Galveston Bay. And Texas Parks and Wildlife defines this area as being characterized by long and continual confrontations with the sea, the wind, and rain. And I think that's appropriate. So, ecoregions, that's how many there are in Texas. So when you get right down to it, the right plant is the one that's in the right place. Now, we talked about microclimates in terms of your houses already. Now I'm going to spend a minute or two talking about macroclimate. That's our hardiness zone and our annual rainfall and our soil type and pH. So the United States Department of Agriculture publishes plant hardiness maps, and this is the zone map for East Texas. And here we are down here in zone 9 B. And these maps, these zones reflect the average annual extreme minimum temperatures as measured over some period of time. And here in Zone B, 9B, that low temperature range on average is said to be between 25 and 30 degrees. So when you buy a plant or you're considering a plant, be sure it's one rated for Zone 9B, and also recognize that we go below that sometimes, but there's not much you can do about that. And I mentioned rainfall earlier. Here's the rainfall map. Here's the desert of West Texas with its 10 inches of rain a year, and the swamps of East Texas with its, what does that say, 55? And we're somewhere in the 40s, down here in Fort Bend County, 46, 48, 50 inches of rain if we're lucky in a good year. And these droughts we've been having are really discouraging for me, even though I have a lot of plants that can take it. So that's perspective for you. So native and well-adapted plants, as I've said, are resource efficient. They have predicted water use. They can take our heat. They're adapted to our soil. You shouldn't have to apply fertilizer, and you shouldn't have to spray them. That's the beauty of it. And that's where Earthkind Landscaping comes, why it makes the recommendations that it does. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know what plants to choose? Well, Texas A&M takes some of the guesswork out of plant selection by giving plants, certain plants, a designation that they call Texas Superstar. And they're plants that were trialed in the field, and the plants that have the greatest performance get this designation. And you can find that catalog of plants here at texassuperstar.com. And just a quick review of what names terms you'll find associated with plants. Annuals, of course, grow from seed, bloom, produce seeds, and die in one growing season. Biennials start from seed and produce vegetation in the first season, then they bloom and produce seed and die in the second season. Perennials live more than 2 years. I've already told you what a herbaceous perennial is, but a woody perennial is one where its woody growth at the top will persist through the winter, and then it'll put new leaves on that same woody structure come spring. And then there's kind of a funny term called perennials. That would be a tropical perennial, but you're growing it so far north where it gets so cold that it's not going to survive a winter. So you use it as an annual. Okay?
Peggy,
Yes.
just giving you a time check of 15 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So I'm going to quickly run through some of these Texas Superstars that I plant, and just to give you a little bit of inspiration. Here's the bluebonnet. It's the biennial, and notice its native range is the Edwards Plateau, but it can be grown here if it's on well-drained soil and it's not getting too much water. The next Texas Superstar I like is Rock Rose. It too is native to the Edwards Plateau ecoregion, but it does well here in well-drained soil, and it keeps its greenery throughout the winter. Turk's Cap is one that I like because I like to attract birds to the yard, and it feeds hummingbirds all year long. And I hardly need a hummingbird feeder when I have Turk's Cap around. I say all summer long it feeds them because you don't have it in the wintertime. But anyway, it is native to our area, and it's adaptable to both shade and full sun. Then I like possum holly. The female has these beautiful berries on it. It's a small accent plant for the landscape. It drops its leaves in the wintertime, and these beautiful red berries stay on it. It's like having a Christmas tree in the front yard. And pretty soon migrating birds come along and they devour the berries, which makes me happy because I like to attract birds to the yard. And notice it is native to our part of Texas, and it'll take poor drainage. You see them growing along roads in the ditches, right? Here's a vine that I like. It's well-mannered, only 10 to 15 feet. Its range is throughout Texas and the eastern United States. It's native range. And it's a one time a year bloomer. These vase-shaped flowers usually coincide with the migration of the ruby-throated hummingbird in the spring. It needs a structure to grow on. And then Mexican bush sage, its native range is Central America and Mexico. So what is it? It's well adapted to our area. And you're going to lose its greenery in the wintertime. It's a herbaceous perennial, but then you can cut back those stems and it'll come back from the ground. Cape Plumbago, its native range, South Africa. The horticulture industry brought it to us, so it's a well-adapted plant. It's going to lose that greenery in the wintertime. It's going to die back when we get frost and freeze, but it comes back from the roots. It's starting to happen now. And it's a beautiful blue flower. And this is a grass, black stockings. Notice it's not native, but it's a beautiful accent plant for the landscape, but it turns to mush in the wintertime and it has to be cut back and it regrows from the roots. And then Hamelia or firebush. Its native range is South and Central Florida. It's a hummingbird attractant. It blooms May through the summer, and it will come back from the roots after it dies back in the wintertime. Thyrallus is another good one. Its native range is Central America and Mexico, but it's well adapted to our area. It holds a lot of its leaves through the wintertime, and then it puts new leaves on this time of year. And it takes a little pruning. This one could use some shaping up, which it'll get in the next couple of weeks. And then if you love roses, there are earth-kind roses, which have that designation because they were subjected to field trials and they earned it because they just are, no nonsense. You don't have to mess with them. Just put them in and love them. And this website takes you to a catalog where you can learn about them. This is Belinda's Dream. It was the first rose to be designated earth kind, introduced in 1992. So finishing up real quickly, I'm back to what most people think about when you think about landscape design, that visual impact thing. So these are all the things you see listed there are the principles of traditional landscape design. I've talked a lot about earth-kind landscape design. Now I'm talking about visual impact, and I'm just going to go through them real quickly. You know it when you see it, accent. It's just a focal point. It could be your front door painted an interesting color, but it helps the landscape. It gives it some pop. There are two kinds of balance. There's symmetrical balance, as you see on the left, where that house looks like a mirror image of itself going up that walkway. The picture on the right, I think you would agree that those plantings look balanced, but they're not symmetrical. Line kind of draws your eye through the landscape. It can be accomplished with plants or it can be accomplished with stones like you see here. Repetition and rhythm is good for eye appeal, using the same plants, over and over with interspersing with other things. Scale and proportion. You wouldn't use these giant plants necessarily in your suburban landscape. They work because they're at the John Ferry Garden in Hempstead. But here in a typical suburban backyard in Sugar Land, I think, you've got some very attractive plantings that are the right scale and proportion for the space. And then simplicity versus complexity. In landscape design, it is said, less is more. Texture, you know it when you see it. It's the contrast. Sometimes it's bark, flowers, leaves. And then lastly, you've got color, using a variety of lighter and darker foliage, accenting with flowering shrubs, using transition. and consistency and repetition. So boiling it, oops, I went too far. Boiling it down, plan before you plant, right place, enough space to mature, grow healthy soil, conserve water, reduce reliance on chemicals, and achieve visible impact and functionality. If you'd like to learn more, here are the classes that are coming up. Next month is about flowering plants for 4 seasons, followed by irrigation system basics, container gardening, shade gardening, and fall maintenance. This is where you can find us if you need us. We Master Gardeners staff a help desk. You can call us, you can write us at this email address, which you can also find at our website. If you have a problem, you can send us pictures. We'll do the research and we'll give you advice. So I'm finished. I'm going to move now to this slide because we want you to complete a survey using this QR code. So please capture it. But now I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, we have a question. Would like to know the best ways to water the lawn and plants sufficiently at the lowest budget for lots of about 5,000 to 9,000 square feet in the Houston summer. And I did post a few different ways with the mulch and the cycle, the soak and cycle methods, but if there's anything else you could add.
Those are good suggestions. I would just say that the soak and cycle is important because runoff happens sometimes when we don't give the water we've applied enough time to percolate down into the soil. Once it starts percolating in, then the next bit of water that comes its way will follow it down, so to speak. I would say that what I'm learning from horticulturalists is that an inch of water once a week is pretty much what our lawns need. So if you have an irrigation system, or even if you're using a sprinkler with a hose, figure out how long you have to run it to apply an inch of water. And you can do that with like tuna fish cans, empty tuna fish cans, or cat food cans. You can put them around in different places in where your sprinkler system is going to hit them, and just see how long it takes you to collect an inch of water. That will help you know how to set your timer or to manage how long you run your faucet to water that lawn. And in the process, you won't be overwatering and conserving water. You will be conserving water.
Okay, our next question, should you still try to improve your soil if you choose plants that are native to your area?
It's less critical, perhaps, but I'm going to have to say yes. Try to improve your soil. And I say that because we're not growing on, our homes are built on disturbed areas, right? So assume that what you've got in your yard is got problems like compaction and that sort of thing. So I would say at least take a soil test first. Before you figure it out, take a soil test and find out what condition your soil is. Now, native plants, if they're native to the Gulf Coast area, they should be fine. But the non-native but well-adapted plants, you know, it can't hurt to know something about your soil. It
Okay,
depends on how much, it really depends on how happy you are with the results that you're getting. That's one way to think about it. If you're planting and plants are growing, you're getting the blooms you want, you've got everything you want, I think you could assume everything's fine for the plant selections that you've made.
okay, here's a good question. How does 3 inches of mulch affect plants that reseed?
It will prevent seeds from getting to having seed soil contact, and you won't have reseeding. You won't have as many plants reseeding. So if that's your objective, then uh, consider maybe a different mulch or less hardwood mulch, perhaps, or a different mulch like pine needles that have spaces between them that seeds can easily be washed through. But yeah, if the seed doesn't make contact with the soil and then get the sunlight and warmth that it needs to germinate, then you won't have that seed, that plant reseeding and spreading as readily. So if you're trying to get an area established with a plant that's going to reseed itself, you're going to want to pull back on that mulch a little bit. You could still do some mulch, but maybe not really, really thick.
Yeah, it's a catch-22, isn't it?
It sure is.
I know, I have that problem. Okay, can you use Scott's mulch on new planted shrubs?
What kind of mulch again?
They said Scott's mulch. I'm assuming maybe like leaving a ring around, maybe they're talking about. Who
Um,
the person who asked that question, if you want to unmute and ask Peggy specifically,
would you spell the word before mulch?
Scott's, Scott's. I think that's the brand. Scott's
Oh,
mulch on new planted shrubs.
sure. I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar with Scott's mulch, but if it's simply an organic mulch, sure, you can use it. Um, I didn't know Scott's made mulches. I don't know everything. It's a lot I don't know.
I know there's a lot out there. Okay, in the soil sample that you showed, the pH was high, but the sulfur level was also high. Do you have suggestions on how to acidify the soil? This individual tried MicroLife humate soil activator, compost with only slight improvement.
I think slight improvement is all we can expect. Changing soil pH is very, very, very difficult. That's what I've learned from all the horticulturalists that I've had the pleasure of learning from for 20 years, that this pH we have in our soils is the pH we have. So what we have to do is choose plants that are well adapted to the soil pH that we have. Um, I have a good friend in Louisiana who knows my love of gardening, and she came to visit me and brought to me a native azalea, a Louisiana native azalea, which I happily put in my backyard beds that you saw a picture of earlier. And I couldn't keep it alive. And I'm sure it's because this of pH. I'll bet you the Louisiana soils are more acidic, and which azaleas like, uh, than ours is. And I lost it. So do some more research if you like. If you do a soil test and it comes back with a pH that's not good for what you're trying to, when you put that soil test form together, it asks you, what are you trying to grow? So the scientists that are going to do your soil test know what you're trying to grow. And when they get it back to you and they tell you about your pH, they should give you recommendations, if any are useful, to how you can adjust it. But I have heard over and over again that it's very, very difficult to change the pH of our soils. And pH is important because if it's not in the sweet spot, you're not having nutrient uptake from all the nutrients that there are potentially in the ground. And if it's a nutrient that that particular plant you're planting needs, uh, it won't happen. They won't get what they need because the pH is off. So
Yeah.
that's why, blueberries are so hard to grow in the ground here. It's impossible to grow them in the ground, I would say.
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah, I would say a soil test is probably the best thing for that individual to
Yes.
see what they need. Another question, just moved into a new home last year and have not seen any earthworms. What would be the best thing we can do right now to get that going?
Add the compost.
Yep.
Add organic matter. Compost, I talked about it in the context of you're building a new bed and you're going to incorporate compost in your soil before you plant. But if you have beds that are already planted, compost can be used like you use mulch. Get you a bag of compost and apply it on the surface of your soil and then mulch on top of that. And you're going to be adding readily available organic matter. And I don't know where earth current worms come from, but they appear. Eventually, you'll have them. Yeah, I have seen the same thing. I've made a new raised bed vegetable garden a few years back, and I couldn't find an earthworm in it. And yesterday, I put the tomato plants in the ground, and lo and behold, I put the shovel in, and there's an earthworm, and I was so happy. So they come. If you
Yes.
build it, they will come and build it with compost, whether you're incorporating it or using it as a application on top of the soil underneath mulch. Mhm.
Yes. Okay. Okay, this is a good one, but also impossible if you ask me. Rabbits. Where can we find information about plants that rabbits dislike?
That is an excellent one. I would have you pose that question to our help desk. They'll do the research and get back to you with some recommendations. I personally don't know. I sure don't know. I think, yeah, for me
Yeah.
it's deer, but I knock on wood, I haven't had the rabbits yet. Mhm.
Yes, I have a very bad rabbit problem, and even the ones sometimes when they get desperate, they'll even eat those plants. So
How discouraging for those of you that want to grow things.
it's
It's possible that this, I don't mean to sound, but maybe they need to be trapped. And I don't know what you do with the trapped rabbit if you can relocate it. And there may be rules about that. You may not just be able to drive down the road and drop it off someplace, but it might be worth looking into, how to.
yeah, that's a hard one. One thing I do, and it does help, is when the plants that I know that they like, when I trim them, like they love zinnia, they love the petunias. When I cut them, I put them in a pile and they go there and eat them there. So that's one thing I've done, and it does help. Okay, another question. One of our last questions, and then all questions, any further questions, you can ask our help desk. But we had one individual. I'd like to add height to my existing bed. I already have Turks cap and giant Turks cap and Rose of Sharon. Will I disturb these shrubs if I lift them up and place garden soil under them and also around them to raise the bed height?
Certainly you will disturb them. And my instincts tell me that choosing the right time of year will make your efforts more successful. Maybe the dead of winter is the time to do that when they're in a dormancy. Uh, Although I have to tell you, Turk's Cap has a taproot that goes further than I can dig. I have a very hard time digging up a Turk's Cap. When I don't want one, I just lop it off with the loppers an inch or two below the soil surface. That's the best I've been able to do. I've never been able to dig up a Turk's Cap. Uh, what was the other one? I've already forgotten the other plant that you mentioned.
The Rose of Sharon.
Rose of Sharon. I have those too. Yeah. Transplanting a Rose of Sharon, I've never tried to do that, but you might be successful at it. You might have to root prune it and maybe prune the top significantly so that you're reducing the size of the plant before you replant it. And who knows how big that root system is? You might be surprised how hard it is to transplant it. But if you're willing to risk it, um, you can try it. Um, I know I have seedlings of Rose of Sharon appear in my gardens occasionally, so I might have a volunteer seedling in a pot as a backup plan in case I lost it during a transplantation process. But yeah, you wouldn't want to pile too much soil on top of the existing plants because that's not going to be good. you would want to dig them out and replant them if you feel you need to really raise a bed. And you might have some loss in the process.
Yes, the Rose of Sharon I actually have done.
Oh,
They
good.
they don't have large roots, and I had really good success with it. They're very hardy.
Nothing like experience.
But
Thanks for chiming
yeah,
in. Yeah.
but the one with the taproot, if you, that's probably guaranteed to die because you can never get
Yeah.
those taproots. Um, this will be actually the absolute last one, but back to the question about the Scott's mulch that we were asking about. She did respond. She was wondering, the Scott's is not organic, and should the mulch be organic?
Well, if it's not, I don't know what it is. So if it's not, but it's not organic. If it's not organic, it's not going to break down and feed the microbes that are going to feed your plants. So you're not accomplishing the imitation of the natural world, the replication of the forest floor. You're not improving your soil fertility if you're not using organic mulch.
Yes, that's probably the most important for even the other questions, right, Peggy, as far as the worms and all the microbes. We want for sure the organic
Exactly.
mulch.
And what organic means is that it's something that was once alive. So it has nothing to do with anything else. It's made from tree bark, tree wood, leaves, leaf mold compost. It was once a living thing, is what we mean when we say organic mulch. It could be leaves, it could be pine needles, it could be shredded bark, it could be pine bark. It's that kind of stuff. And if it's not organic, then it won't improve your soil. Um, it won't feed the microbes and it won't improve your soil fertility. It might be a good mulch in terms of shading the soil and preventing evaporation, but it's not going to later decompose and give you any benefit to your soil structure.
Well, thank you so much, Peggy. That was an amazing presentation. Very nice.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Also, as Peggy mentioned, we do have our QR code for the survey. We would very much appreciate if you filled out the survey because again, we do actually go through every single survey to prepare for our future classes. And we can stop recording now. Everybody who is registered for the class will receive